The orc woman stood in the doorway with her proposal written out on 2 sheets of paper, and Jonas Donnelly looked up from his breakfast porridge to see green skin, small tusks, and flour dust covering her forearms up past the elbows. She was perhaps 45, round in the hips and belly, with gray streaking through the black braid that hung over one shoulder. Her dress was patched but clean, and behind her in the yard stood a wagon loaded with wooden forms, copper pots, and what looked like an entire dismantled dairy operation. Jonas set down his spoon. He had not spoken to another person in 3 weeks. "I am Brenna Whitmore," she said. "My creamery burned to the foundation 4 nights ago. I have no family, no coin for rebuilding, and winter is 14 weeks away. You are Jonas Donnelly. You keep 63 goats. Your herd is the finest in 3 counties, and your cheese is inedible." He could not argue with any of that. He stood, all 6 feet of him feeling suddenly too tall in the low-ceilinged kitchen, and gestured to the chair across from his. She sat. She unfolded the papers and laid them flat on the table, smoothing the creases with hands that bore old burned scars across the knuckles. "This is a proposal for partnership, not marriage, not employment, partnership. I will read the terms, and if you agree, you will sign at the bottom." Jonas sat back down. He folded his hands and waited. Brenna began to read in a voice that carried the cadence of someone who had practiced this speech during an 11-mile walk. 1. You will provide shelter, a workspace suitable for dairy production, and access to the milk from your herd. 2. I will transform that milk into cheese of sufficient quality to sell at market rates or higher. 3. All costs of operation will be shared equally. 4. All profits will be divided equally. 5. Either party may dissolve this partnership with 1 month's notice, provided all outstanding obligations are settled. 6. This partnership will be reviewed each year on the 1st of October to determine whether both parties wish to continue. She looked up. There is a 7th clause. Jonas waited. 7. No physical intimacy will be expected or offered as part of this arrangement. This is a business partnership only. The kitchen was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Jonas looked at the papers, at the careful handwriting, at the woman who had walked 11 miles with a wagon full of everything she owned to offer him a deal that would save them both. He reached for the papers and read through them slowly. He was not a fast reader, but he was thorough. When he reached the 7th clause, he read it twice, moving his lips slightly as he worked through each word. Then he set the papers down and looked at Brenna Whitmore. "Clause 7, he said. She tensed slightly. "Yes." Read it again. She did, her voice steady. "No physical intimacy will be expected or offered as part of this arrangement. This is a business partnership only." Jonas nodded. He stood, walked to the shelf above the stove, and retrieved a pen and ink. He sat back down, dipped the pen, and signed his name at the bottom of both copies. His signature was surprisingly neat for a man with such large hands. "Clause 7 stands," he said. "For now." Brenna blinked. Then she took the pen and signed her own name beside his. "For now, partnership gets reviewed every October 1st, Jonas said. "That is what the paper says." The smallest smile touched the corners of her mouth. She folded one copy and tucked it into her apron pocket. The other she left on the table. "Then we have an agreement. I will need help unloading the wagon." They worked in silence through the morning. The wagon held more than Jonas had initially seen. Not just the cheese forms and copper pots, but muslin cloths, a butter churn, aging racks, salt boxes, and a collection of small tools whose purposes he could only guess at. Brenna directed him with economical gestures, pointing to where each item should go in the space he cleared for her in the dairy shed. The shed was attached to the barn, and had been used primarily for storage since Jonas had stopped trying to make cheese himself 2 years ago. He had the goats, he had the milk, but whatever alchemy turned one into the other had always escaped him. The results were consistently terrible. Too bitter, too sour, too dry, too wet, too everything wrong. He sold the milk fresh to the Abbey Creamery for a pittance and hated every transaction. By noon the wagon was empty and the shed was transformed. Brenna stood in the center of it, turning slowly, taking inventory of what she had and what she would need. "The well," she asked, 30 paces west. "Water is cold and clean. Firewood, shed behind the house." "I cut enough for 3 winters. Cold storage," Jonas hesitated. "Root cellar under the house. It stays cool but not cold enough for aging cheese properly." Brenna walked outside and surveyed the landscape. The farm sat in a valley with limestone cliffs rising to the east. She walked toward them, her skirts swishing through the long grass, and Jonas followed. She stopped at the base of the cliff and put her hand on the stone. "This," she said. "We dig into this. Limestone holds temperature. If we go deep enough, we can age cheese the old way. The way my grandmother taught me. That is a lot of digging." "Yes." She turned to look at him. "But it is also the difference between cheese that sells and cheese that wins. Do you want to just survive, Jonas Donnelly, or do you want to make something people remember?" He looked at the cliff face, at the woman with flour still dusting her elbows, at the farm that had been too quiet for too long. "I want to make something people remember. Then we dig." They began the next morning. Jonas had tools for breaking ground, but limestone required patience and precision. Brenna marked out the dimensions with stakes and string, 12 feet deep, 10 feet wide, 8 feet high at the center. Big enough for racks and working space. Small enough to stay cool. The work was slow. Jonas swung the pick while Brenna hauled away the broken stone in a wheelbarrow. They worked in shifts, trading tasks every hour. By the end of the first day, they had gone in barely 2 feet. "This will take all summer," Jonas said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Yes," Brenna agreed. She was breathing hard but steady. "And by autumn, we will have the best aging cave in the valley." While they dug, the goats still needed tending and the milk still needed processing. Brenna rose before dawn to begin work in the dairy shed. Jonas would find her there when he came in from the morning milking, already heating the first batch in the copper pot, her hands moving through the steps with the unconscious grace of long practice. She taught him without seeming to teach. She simply did the work and answered his questions when he asked them. How hot to bring the milk, how to tell when the curds were ready, how much rennet, how much salt, how long to press. He learned by watching, by doing the small tasks she gave him, by tasting samples she cut from the wheels and handed to him without comment. The cheese improved. Not dramatically at first, but enough that when Jonas took a batch to the village market, people bought it. Not just out of politeness or habit, but because it tasted good. News spread quickly in a small valley. The lonely goat farmer had taken in an orc woman. They were living together. They were making cheese together. The gossip ran the full spectrum from scandal to sympathy, and Jonas heard fragments of it whenever he went to the village. He ignored it all. So did Brenna. They fell into a routine. Up before dawn, milk the goats, heat the milk, make the curds, press the cheese, salt the wheels. Turn the aging ones. Dig the cave. Eat, sleep, repeat. It was the most purposeful Jonas had felt in years. June arrived with heat that made the dairy work harder. Brenna adjusted the timing, working in the coolest hours of morning and evening, resting during the worst of the midday sun. Jonas did the same with the digging, going at the limestone in the early morning when his muscles were fresh. The cave was now 6 feet deep. They had hit a seam of softer stone that made the work go faster, and Jonas allowed himself to hope they might finish before autumn after all. One evening in late June, Brenna made bread to go with the vegetable stew Jonas had assembled. She had a light hand with dough, and the loaves came out of his oven golden and perfect. They ate in the kitchen, the windows open to catch any breeze. "The first wheels will be ready to test in 2 weeks," Brenna said. "The ones we pressed in early May. Will they be good? I think so. The milk is excellent. The process was clean. The temperature has been stable enough in your root cellar, though not ideal." Jonas buttered another slice of bread. "What happens if they are good? We take them to the county fair in August. There is a cheese competition. Prize is a blue ribbon and 50 silver coins. And if we win, then people know we are serious. Then buyers come to us instead of us going to market. Then we make enough to build properly, to expand, to do this right." Jonas considered this. "What name do we enter under?" Brenna was quiet for a moment. "That is complicated, because you are an orc." "Yes." She met his eyes steadily. "If I put my name on the entry, half the judges will refuse to taste it. If you put your name on it and we win and they discover I made it, they will say you cheated." "What do people usually do?" "I have no idea. I have never been in this position before." Jonas thought about it while he finished his bread. Finally he said, "We enter under both names, Donnelly and Whitmore, partnership cheese. That is the truth. That is what we agreed to." Brenna smiled, small and genuine. "All right, the truth it is." July brought a stretch of perfect weather. Warm days, cool nights, and no rain to complicate the work. The cave reached 8 feet deep, then 10. Jonas built a wooden door for the entrance, and Brenna lined the interior walls with shelving she assembled from lumber he had stored in the barn. The first test wheels were everything she had hoped. The texture was dense but not dry, the flavor complex and clean. Jonas ate an entire wedge standing in the root cellar and declared it the best thing he had ever tasted. "This will win," he said. "Maybe," Brenna said. "Competition is unpredictable, but it is good. It is very good." They made more. The cave was cool enough now to start using for aging, and Brenna transferred the most promising wheels into the space with the care of someone moving sleeping infants. Jonas helped her arrange them on the racks, and together they stood in the dim coolness and looked at what they had built. "It is beautiful," Brenna said softly. Jonas agreed, though he was not entirely sure if she meant the cave or the cheese or the work itself. The county fair was held the second week of August in a town called Millbrook, 15 miles south. Jonas had been once before, years ago, and remembered it as loud and chaotic and full of people who wanted to sell him things he did not need. They loaded the wagon with 6 wheels of their best cheese, packed in straw and covered with cloth. Brenna wore her good dress, the gray one without patches, and Jonas wore a shirt without holes. They looked almost respectable. The fair was every bit as loud and chaotic as Jonas remembered. Animals everywhere, children running between the stalls, vendors shouting the virtues of their goods. The cheese competition was held in a large tent on the second day, and entries had to be registered by noon the first day. They found the registration table and filled out the form. Name of entrants: Jonas Donnelly and Brenna Whitmore. Type of cheese: aged goat cheese. Region: Ashford Valley. The woman at the table took the form, read it, and looked up. Her gaze went from Jonas to Brenna and back again. "Both of you, partnership," Jonas said. "I see." She made a note on the form. "The judging is tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. Please have your entry on the table by 1. Next." They spent the rest of the day walking through the fair. Brenna stopped at every cheese stall, tasting samples, asking questions, studying the competition. Jonas followed and watched her work. She had a way of talking to people that put them at ease, even when they noticed her green skin and the small tusks that showed when she smiled. She was knowledgeable and respectful, and most people responded in kind. A few did not. One vendor, a man with a red face and a large belly, refused to let her taste his cheese and told them both to move along. Brenna left without argument, but Jonas saw the tightness around her eyes. They stayed that night in the wagon, parked at the edge of the fairgrounds with dozens of other travelers. It was not comfortable, but it was free. Jonas slept on the ground beside the wagon while Brenna took the wagon bed. He woke once in the middle of the night and heard her moving above him, restless. "Cannot sleep?" he asked quietly. "Thinking," she said, "about tomorrow." "Yes." "The cheese is good, Brenna. Whatever happens, the cheese is good." A long pause. Then, "Thank you, Jonas." He fell back asleep to the sound of her breathing steadying above him. The judging tent was packed. 37 entries crowded the tables, each with a small card listing the maker and the type. Jonas and Brenna's wheels sat in the middle of the second table, looking humble and plain next to some of the more elaborate presentations. The judges were three: a woman from the Guild of Dairymen, a man who owned the largest creamery in the southern counties, and a monk from the abbey that controlled most of the valley's milk trade. They moved slowly down the tables, tasting small samples of each cheese, making notes, conferring in low voices. Jonas and Brenna stood at the back of the tent with the other entrants. Brenna's hands were clasped tightly in front of her, the only sign of her nerves. The judges reached their table. The monk cut a thin slice of their cheese, examined it, smelled it, and put it in his mouth. His expression did not change. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and made a note on his paper. The woman from the guild tasted next. Her eyebrows went up slightly. She took a second, smaller taste, then nodded and made her own notes. The creamery owner was last. He tasted, paused, and looked at the card. Jonas saw him read the names, saw him look up and scan the crowd, saw his eyes land on Brenna and narrow slightly. He made his notes and the judges moved on. The deliberation took an hour. Jonas and Brenna waited outside the tent, sitting on the grass in the shade. They did not talk. There was nothing to say that had not already been said in the cheese itself. Finally, the judges emerged and called everyone back inside. The awards were announced in reverse order. Third place went to a sheep's milk blue from the northern hills. Second place went to a sharp cheddar from a farm Jonas had never heard of. The head judge, the woman from the guild, stepped forward to announce the first place winner. She held up a blue ribbon and a small purse of coins. First place in this year's county cheese competition goes to entry number 23. Aged Goat Cheese by Jonas Donnelly and Brenna Whitmore of Ashford Valley. Congratulations! The tent erupted in applause. Jonas felt Brenna go rigid beside him, then felt her hand find his and squeeze so hard his fingers went numb. They walked together to the front and accepted the ribbon and the prize money. The judge shook both their hands and said something congratulatory that Jonas did not quite hear over the ringing in his ears. They walked out of the tent into the late afternoon sunlight, and Brenna was crying. Not sobbing, just silent tears running down her face while she clutched the blue ribbon in one hand. Jonas steered her away from the crowd, back to their wagon, and waited while she composed herself. "I did not think they would choose us," she said finally. "I thought once they saw me, once they knew, they would find a reason not to." "The cheese was the best," Jonas said. "That is all that mattered." "I hope so." They started home that evening, too wired to sleep despite the exhaustion. The wagon rattled through the darkness while Jonas drove and Brenna sat beside him, the ribbon carefully folded in her pocket. "What do we do now?" Jonas asked. "We make more cheese," Brenna said. "And we wait for the buyers to come." The buyers did come at first. 3 different merchants made the trip to the farm in the week after the fair, all interested in purchasing wheels for resale in the cities. Brenna negotiated with each one, her business sense sharp and clear. They sold 30 wheels at prices that made Jonas blink. Then the abbey found out. The monk who had judged the fair came to the farm himself, accompanied by 2 lay brothers. He introduced himself as Brother Matthias, and his voice was polite but his eyes were cold. "I need to verify something," he said. "Which of you made the cheese that won the ribbon?" "We both did," Jonas said. "But who did the actual work? Who heated the milk, formed the curds, pressed the wheels?" Brenna stepped forward. "I did." Brother Matthias nodded as though she had confirmed something he suspected. "I see. That is unfortunate." "Why?" Jonas asked. "Because the abbey has a contract with the Guild of Dairymen. Any cheese sold commercially in this region must meet certain standards, and those standards require that the maker be certified by the Guild." "Are you certified, Miss Whitmore?" "I am not," Brenna said steadily. "I was never able to apply. The Guild does not certify orcs." "Then you are operating illegally. The cheese you sold cannot be resold and any future sales will be blocked. I am sorry, but those are the rules." He left, taking the 2 silent brothers with him. Jonas and Brenna stood in the yard and watched them go. "They are going to destroy us," Brenna said quietly. "No," Jonas said. "They are not." But it seemed like they might. Within 3 days, 2 of the merchants sent messages canceling their orders and demanding refunds. The third simply stopped responding to Brenna's letters. The market stall in the village that had been selling their cheese sent word that they could no longer carry it, citing pressure from the abbey's creamery. Brenna worked in grim silence through the rest of August, making cheese because the milk still came and it had to be processed. But now there was nowhere to sell it. The wheels piled up in the aging cave, beautiful and useless. Jonas watched her withdraw. She spoke less, smiled not at all. She worked until her hands cramped and her back ached, and when he suggested she rest, she ignored him. He did not know how to fix this. He knew animals and land and physical work, but he did not know how to fight an institution like the abbey. He did not know how to make the guild change rules that had been in place for generations. September came with the first cold nights and the leaves beginning to turn. The goats grew their winter coats and the milk production slowed. Brenna adjusted her schedule accordingly, and the pile of unsold cheese grew a little slower. Then the sickness came to the abbey's herd. It started with one of the satellite farms that supplied the abbey creamery, a dairy operation 5 miles north with 50 cows. The animals developed scours, their milk turned bitter, and within a week half the herd was too sick to produce at all. The sickness spread. 3 more farms reported symptoms. The abbey's own dairy herd, the pride of the valley, went down next. Within 2 weeks, nearly every cow in a 15-mile radius was affected. The cause was never determined. Bad feed, tainted water, some illness passed from one herd to another. It did not matter. What mattered was that the valley's milk supply had collapsed in the middle of the autumn make, the season when cheeses were traditionally prepared for winter storage and sale. Jonas heard about it at the village market, where farmers stood in worried clusters and spoke in low voices about financial ruin. His goats, isolated on their hill farm and fed only what he grew himself, were unaffected. He drove home and told Brenna what he had heard. She listened without expression. Then she said, "They will come to us. The abbey, everyone. All the farmers who just lost their income, the abbey that just lost its monopoly, the merchants who need product for the winter markets. They will all come to us, because we are the only ones in the valley who still have good milk and good cheese." "What do we do?" Brenna stood and walked to the window. She looked out at the aging cave, at the barn, at the valley spread below. "We offer to help, even after what they did to us. Especially after what they did to us." She turned to face him. "We are not going to win this by being vindictive. We are going to win this by being indispensable." Jonas thought about that. Then he nodded. "What is the plan?" Brenna laid it out over the next hour. They would reach out to every farmer in the valley who had lost their herd's production. They would offer to teach Brenna's methods, freely and without charge. They would share the aging cave, expanding it if necessary. They would form a cooperative, a fellowship of dairy farmers who worked together instead of competing, and they would sell the cheese under a collective mark that represented all of them. "The Abbey cannot block all of us," Brenna said. "Not if we stand together. And the Guild cannot refuse to certify a fellowship that represents half the valley's production. Will people agree to it? I do not know, but we have to try." They started with the farmers Jonas knew, the ones he saw at market, the ones who had always been civil even when others were not. Jonas drove the wagon while Brenna drafted proposals, writing them out in her careful hand by lamplight each evening. The first farmer they approached was a man named Richard Hollies, who kept a small herd of mixed dairy animals on the western edge of the valley. He listened to Brenna's proposal while his wife served cider and his 3 daughters watched from the doorway. When Brenna finished, Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You want to help us, after what happened at the fair?" "Yes," Brenna said. "Why?" "Because we are all in the same valley facing the same winter. Because cheese is better when makers share knowledge instead of hoarding it. And because I am tired of fighting. I would rather build." Richard looked at his wife. She gave a tiny nod. He looked back at Brenna and Jonas. "All right. I am in. What do you need from me?" One by one, the farmers agreed. Not all of them, not at first, but enough. Enough to matter. By the end of September, 12 farms had joined the fellowship. Brenna held workshops in the expanded aging cave, teaching groups of 3 or 4 at a time. Jonas helped with the heavy work, moving equipment, digging extensions to the cave, building new racks. The cave grew into a network of connected chambers, each one holding wheels from different farms, each one marked with the maker's symbol and the collective mark they had designed together. A simple pressed cheese wheel surrounded by a circle of stars, one for each founding member. The Abbey sent Brother Matthias again in early October. This time he arrived to find the yard full of farmers and the cave full of cheese. He stood at the entrance and stared. "What is this?" he asked. "A fellowship," Brenna said. "Independent dairy farmers working together. We would like to discuss terms of sale with the Abbey for winter supply." "You cannot just form a fellowship and expect." "We already have," said Richard Hollies, "and we have contracts with 3 merchants in the capital, but we would prefer to sell locally when possible. Are you interested or not?" Brother Matthias looked at the crowd of farmers, at the cave entrance, at Jonas and Brenna standing side by side. He looked like a man watching something he had thought controlled slip entirely out of his hands. "I will have to consult with the abbot," he said finally. "Do that," Brenna said. "We will be here." The Abbey agreed to terms 2 weeks later. Fair prices, no exclusivity, and a guarantee that the fellowship's cheese would be treated the same as any other quality product. It was not everything, but it was enough. The Guild of Dairymen sent a representative in November to inspect the operation. She spent 3 days examining the facilities, tasting cheese, and interviewing fellowship members. At the end, she certified the collective and issued a provisional mark that would allow them to sell commercially while individual certifications were processed. She also, in a private conversation with Brenna, apologized for the Guild's previous refusal to certify orcs. "The rules are changing," she said, "slowly, But they are changing. You are helping with that. The 1st of October had come and gone in the chaos of forming the fellowship. Jonas realized on October 10th that they had missed their partnership review. He found Brenna in the cave, turning wheels in the cool darkness. "We missed the date," he said. She looked up. "What date?" "October 1st. Partnership review. The contract says we review the terms every October 1st. Brenna set down the wheel she was holding. She wiped her hands on her apron and studied his face. "Do you want to review it?" "Yes." "All right. What do you want to change?" Jonas had been thinking about this for days. He had been thinking about it, if he was honest, since June, since July. Since the night at the fair when he had heard her breathing steady above him in the darkness. "Clause 7, he said. Brenna went very still. "What about Clause 7? It says no physical intimacy will be expected or offered. It says this is a business partnership only." "Yes." "I want to change that." The silence stretched out. Jonas could hear water dripping somewhere in the depths of the cave, could hear the distant bleating of a goat outside. "Why?" Brenna asked finally. "Because it is not just business anymore. Because I think about you when you are not in the room. Because you make my life better in ways that have nothing to do with cheese or money or partnership agreements. Because I would like to court you properly, if you are willing." Brenna's hands were shaking. She clasped them together and looked at the floor. "I am 46 years old. I am 42, so I am an orc," I noticed. "Jonas, I am not." She stopped, tried again. "I do not know if I can give you everything a man might want. Children, maybe. A normal life, certainly not. People will talk. People will judge. It will complicate things." "Things are already complicated," Jonas said. "And I do not want a normal life. I want this life. I want to make cheese with you and dig caves with you and ignore people who talk. I want to sit with you at the end of the day and eat bread you made. I want more of what we already have, and I want it to be something we choose instead of something we stumbled into." Brenna looked up at him. Her eyes were wet. "You are sure?" "I am sure. But only if you want the same thing." She crossed the space between them in 3 steps and kissed him. It was awkward and tentative, and her tusks bumped his chin, and she tasted like salt and dust and everything good. When they pulled apart, she was crying again. "Clause 7 is amended," she whispered. "Noted," Jonas said, and kissed her again. They courted through the winter. It was not dramatic or showy. They were both too practical for grand gestures. But Jonas carved her a new set of cheese knives for midwinter, the handles inlaid with dark wood he traded for at market. Brenna made him a thick wool sweater that actually fit his shoulders, a miracle of measuring and knitting that must have taken her weeks. They worked side by side as they always had, but now there were touches. Her hand on his back as she passed behind him in the dairy. His fingers brushing her cheek when she had flour on it. Small intimacies that added up to something larger. The fellowship thrived. The winter markets took every wheel they could produce, and orders came in for spring. The abbey bought regularly now, and the merchants from the capital returned with contracts and apologies. The fair organizers sent a letter in January, formally apologizing for the misunderstanding regarding their entry and inviting them to serve as guest judges for the next competition. Brenner wrote back accepting and suggesting they revise their certification requirements to be more inclusive. She did not receive a reply to that part, but she had not expected one. Spring came early, and with it the flush of milk that signaled the busiest season. The fellowship met weekly now, sharing techniques and troubleshooting problems. The aging cave had become a gathering place, and Brenna had become, without anyone quite deciding it, the head of the collective. She managed it with the same calm competence she brought to everything. She mediated disputes, organized schedules, and kept the accounts. The farmers trusted her, and slowly the valley was changing. Jonas proposed on a Tuesday in April. They were in the cave, inspecting the spring's first wheels. The space smelled like limestone and aging cheese, cool and clean. Brenna was making notes on her clipboard, checking each wheel against her records. Jonas had been carrying the ring in his pocket for a week, waiting for the right moment. He had realized finally that there would never be a perfect moment, that life did not work that way. So he pulled it out while she was writing and said, "Brenna." She looked up, saw the ring, went very still. "I want to amend the contract again," Jonas said. His heart was hammering so hard he was surprised it did not echo off the cave walls. "I want to change it from a business partnership to a marriage partnership. I want to share everything with you, not just work and profit. I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life and go to sleep knowing you are there. I want to build this thing we are making and call you my wife while we do it." He held out the ring. It was simple silver, no stone, because he knew she did not care for ornament. "Will you marry me?" Brenna set down her clipboard very carefully. She took the ring and turned it over in her fingers, examining it like she examined everything with full attention. "Yes," she said, "but I have conditions." Jonas laughed, a startled bark of sound that made her smile. "Of course you do. 1, we have a small wedding. Just the fellowship and whoever else we actually want there. No spectacle." "Agreed." 2, I keep my name. Whitmore stays on the cheese mark. "Agreed." 3, you promise to keep talking to me. You are a quiet man, Jonas, and I love that about you, but in a marriage I need words sometimes. I need to know what you are thinking. He stepped closer and took her hands. "I promise. I will not always be good at it, but I will try. That is all I ask." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Anything else?" "Yes." She pulled him down and kissed him, long and deep and thorough. "We make the wedding cake ourselves. I refuse to trust anyone else to get it right." They were married 6 weeks later in the meadow beside the farm, with the aging cave visible in the background, and the goats wandering curiously at the edges of the gathering. Richard Hollis's eldest daughter played fiddle, and a traveling priest from the village performed the ceremony. Brenna wore a green dress she had sewn herself, the color almost matching her skin. Jonas wore his good shirt and the sweater she had made him, even though the day was warm. The fellowship attended, along with a scattering of villagers and the guild representative who had certified them. Brother Matthias sent a letter of congratulations, but did not attend. Jonas considered that a blessing. They spoke their vows standing hand in hand while the sun climbed higher, and the spring breeze carried the smell of flowers and fresh grass. Jonas promised to love and cherish and share his life. Brenna promised the same, and also to keep making the bread he liked, because she knew he would never admit how much he preferred hers to his own attempts. The priest declared them married, and the gathering erupted in cheers. They kissed while the fellowship threw rice and flower petals, and Jonas felt something settle in his chest that he had not known was unsettled. The celebration lasted until evening. Tables had been set up in the yard, groaning with food the fellowship members had brought. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Jonas danced twice, once with Brenna and once with Richard Hollis's wife because she asked, and he could not figure out how to politely refuse. Brenna danced with seemingly everyone, her skirts swirling, her face bright with joy. Jonas watched from the sidelines and marveled that this was his life now, that this woman had walked 11 miles with a wagon and a proposal and changed everything. As the sun set and the lanterns were lit, Brenna found him and took his hand. "Come on," she said. "There is one more thing." She led him to the cave where the fellowship's founding members had gathered. In the center of the main chamber stood a new cheese wheel, the largest Jonas had ever seen. It must have weighed 50 pounds. Pressed into the wax coating were two marks, his and hers, side by side. "We made this together," Brenna said. "The fellowship, all of us. It took 3 months to age and it is ready today. We are going to cut it now, to mark the founding of the fellowship and your marriage." Richard stepped forward with a knife. He scored the top of the wheel in a precise circle, then handed the knife to Brenna. She cut through the wax and into the cheese itself, the blade sinking smoothly through the firm paste. Jonas took the knife from her and completed the cut. Together they lifted out the first wedge, and the assembled fellowship members cheered. The cheese was perfect. Dense and rich and complex, with a sharpness that mellowed into something almost sweet. They cut wedges for everyone, and the group stood in the cave eating cheese and drinking cider while the sounds of the continued celebration drifted in from outside. "This is what we built," Brenna said quietly, standing beside Jonas. "Not just cheese, this community, partnership, something that lasts." Jonas put his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "You built it. You walked into my kitchen with a proposal and made it happen." "We built it," she corrected. "I could not have done this alone, neither could you. That is the whole point." Richard raised his mug. "To Jonas and Brenna Donnelly Whitmore and to the fellowship they founded, may our cheese always age well and our collaboration last forever. To the fellowship." The others echoed and drank. They stayed in the cave until the wheel was half gone, and the celebration outside had quieted to small conversations. Jonas and Brenna walked back to the house hand in hand, their home now officially shared, their future officially joined. The next morning, life returned to its rhythm. There were goats to milk and cheese to make and fellowship business to manage. But now there were also mornings where Jonas woke to Brenna's warmth beside him, and evenings where they cooked together in the kitchen, and moments throughout each day where they touched in passing, a reminder that they had chosen this. The fellowship continued to grow. By midsummer, they had 20 member farms, and the aging cave had been expanded twice more. The collective mark was gaining recognition in markets across the region, and orders were coming in faster than they could fill them. The guild sent a second representative in July to conduct follow-up inspections. This one was a younger man, and he spent most of his visit asking Brenna questions about her techniques. He left with 3 pages of notes and a promise to include her methods in the guild's next training manual. "They are going to train people to do it your way," Jonas said that evening, reading the letter the representative had left. Brenna smiled. "Good. That is how knowledge is supposed to work. You learn, you teach, you pass it on. Nobody owns a technique. Nobody owns a recipe. We all just try to make the best cheese we can." August brought the county fair again. Jonas and Brenna attended, though they did not enter the competition. Instead, Brenna served as a guest judge, exactly as the organizers had invited. She took the role seriously, tasting each entry carefully and making detailed notes. The winner was a young woman from the northern valleys, making cheese for the first time in competition. When Brenna handed her the blue ribbon, the woman burst into tears and hugged her. Jonas watched from the crowd and felt a fierce pride that had nothing to do with winning and everything to do with watching his wife help someone else succeed. The rest of August passed in heat and work, and long evenings sitting on the porch together, watching the sun set over the valley. Brenna had started talking about expanding the herd, maybe adding some milk cows to the mix. Jonas was considering it, though he was not sure he had it in him to learn a whole new animal after 20 years with goats. September brought cooler nights and the beginning of the autumn make. The fellowship was preparing for its biggest season yet, with contracts lined up and storage secured. The cave was full of wheels aging at different stages, each one marked with the maker's symbol and the fellowship star. Jonas and Brenna stood at the entrance one evening, looking at the space they had created. It had been just over a year since she had walked up his driveway with a wagon and a proposal. Just over a year since he had read Clause 7 twice and signed his name on the bottom line. "I am glad you knocked on my door," Jonas said. Brenna leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "I am glad you answered it. What would you have done if I had said no? Tried the next farm, I suppose. Kept trying until someone said yes. And if no one had," she was quiet for a moment. "I do not know, but I am glad we do not have to find out." They stood there as the light faded, two people who had made a business partnership and built it into something neither had expected. The valley spread below them, dotted with the farms of the fellowship members. The cave behind them held the work of dozens of hands, all contributing to something larger than any of them alone. Jonas thought about the man he had been a year ago. Lonely, isolated, making terrible cheese and not caring because there was no one to care for. He thought about what would have happened if Brenna had not come, if he had continued on that trajectory, growing older and quieter and more alone. "Thank you," he said. Brenna tilted her head to look up at him. "For what?" "For walking 11 miles. For writing out that proposal, for asking." She smiled, and in the fading light her tusks caught the last rays of sun. "You signed it. That is what mattered. You could have said no, but you did not. You read Clause 7 twice and you signed anyway. Best decision I ever made." "Second best," she corrected. "The best was when you asked to amend it." Jonas could not argue with that. He kissed her instead, there in the cave entrance with the cheese aging behind them and the valley spread out in front of them and the future stretching ahead, full of work and partnership and love. They walked back to the house as the stars began to appear, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next. The goats bleated a greeting from the barn. The windows of the house glowed warm in the darkness. Somewhere in the valley, other fellowship members were finishing their own work, tending their own animals, making their own cheese. And in the morning, they would all do it again, together. The fellowship held its first anniversary meeting in October, marking a full year since the collective's founding. 23 farms were now part of the organization, and the aging cave had become a network of chambers that extended deep into the limestone cliff. The meeting was held in Richard Hollis's barn because it was the only space large enough for everyone. Brenna presented the year's accounts, total production, total sales, and profit distributions. The numbers were good, better than good. Every farm had earned more than they would have alone, and the collective had enough in reserve to weather a bad season if one came. "We did this together," Brenna said, standing at the front of the barn with her notes in hand. "Every person here contributed. Every farm made this work. I want to be clear about that. This is not my success or Jonas's success. This is all of us." Richard stood. "I want to propose that we formally elect Brenna as the fellowship's master cheesemaker. She has been doing the work anyway. We should make it official." The vote was unanimous. Brenna accepted with grace and a promise to serve the fellowship to the best of her ability. That night back at their farm, Jonas found her in the kitchen working on the books for the next season. He set a cup of tea beside her and sat down. "Master cheesemaker," he said. "Sounds impressive." "It is just a title. It is recognition. You earned it." She set down her pen and reached for the tea. "I could not have done any of this without you. You know that, right? The cave, the fellowship, all of it. You were the first person to say yes. You were the first person to believe. You made it easy to believe. You showed up with a plan and the skill to back it up." "I showed up with desperation and hope," Brenna corrected. "The plan was mostly improvised." Jonas smiled. "Then you are very good at improvising." They sat in comfortable silence, drinking tea and listening to the night sounds through the open window. This was Jonas's favorite part of every day. The quiet hour after work was done, when they could just be together without agenda or schedule. "I have been thinking," Brenna said eventually, "about next year." "What about it?" "I want to start a training program, something formal, where young people who want to learn cheese making can come and apprentice with the fellowship. We rotate them through different farms, teach them different techniques, give them a real foundation." "You want to teach?" "I want to pass it on, the same way my grandmother taught me, the same way the guild should have been teaching people all along. I want to make sure that knowledge does not get lost or hoarded." Jonas considered this. "That is a lot of work." "Yes, but it is good work." "Yes, then we should do it." Brenna smiled and reached across the table to take his hand. "Thank you for what? For always saying yes, for always being willing to try, for being exactly who you are." Jonas squeezed her hand. "Same to you." The training program began the following spring. 3 young people from different parts of the valley were accepted for the first session. 2 girls and a boy, none older than 20. They spent 6 months rotating through the fellowship farms, learning every aspect of dairy production and cheese making. Brenna was a patient teacher, demonstrating techniques and then stepping back to let the apprentices try themselves. She corrected gently and praised progress. By the end of the 6 months, all 3 apprentices were producing cheese of decent quality. One of them, a girl named Sarah from a small farm in the Western Hills, showed exceptional promise. She had a feel for the work that could not be taught, an instinct for when the curds were ready or when a wheel needed more time. Brenna offered her a position as her assistant, and Sarah accepted immediately. With Sarah helping, Brenna had more time to focus on the fellowship's strategic growth. She negotiated new contracts, explored new markets, and began experimenting with different aging techniques. The cave expanded again, this time with a dedicated section for experimental batches. Jonas watched all of this with quiet pride. His quiet life had become something much larger, and while it was sometimes overwhelming, it was never boring. The farm itself was thriving. The goat herd had grown to 80 animals, and Jonas had indeed added a small group of milk cows to the mix. Learning their temperament had been a challenge, but he managed with advice from Richard and other fellowship members who kept cattle. 2 years became 3. The fellowship celebrated its 3rd anniversary with a festival that drew people from all over the valley. There was music and food and a cheese competition just for fellowship members. Jonas entered a wheel and came in 4th, which he considered a victory given that he was competing against people Brenna had trained. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. Work, partnership, community, love. The seasons turned. The cheese aged. The fellowship grew. In the 4th year, the Guild of Dairymen officially revised their certification requirements to remove all restrictions based on race or species. The announcement was made at their annual conference, and the representative who had inspected the fellowship personally wrote to Brenna to let her know she had been instrumental in making the change happen. "You did it," Jonas said when she showed him the letter. "You changed their rules." "We did it," Brenna corrected. "The fellowship, all of us proving that good cheese is good cheese no matter who makes it. You walked through that door first, and you opened it. That matters." They were sitting on the porch, watching evening settle over the valley. It was their favorite spot, the place where they ended most days. The view never got old. The rolling hills, the scattered farms, the limestone cliff with the cave entrance visible at its base. "You ever regret it?" Jonas asked. "The creamery burning, having to start over?" Brenna thought about it. "I regret the fire itself. I regret losing the building my grandmother built, but everything that came after. No, I do not regret any of it. This life is better than the one I had before. Even with all the work, all the politics with the Abbey and the Guild. Even with all that, because I am not alone anymore, I have you and the fellowship and work that matters. My grandmother would have been proud. Jonas took her hand. I think she would have been. They sat in silence as the last light faded. Tomorrow there would be more work, more cheese to make, more fellowship business to manage. But tonight, there was just this. Two people who had taken a risk on each other and built something that lasted. The 5th anniversary of their partnership arrived in October. The fellowship threw a celebration that was part business meeting, part harvest festival. 52 farms were now members, and the collective mark was recognized across 5 counties. The aging cave had become a complex of chambers and corridors, an underground cathedral dedicated to the art of cheese making. Brenna gave a short speech thanking everyone for their support and dedication. She talked about what they had built together, about the importance of cooperation over competition, about the future they were creating. Jonas did not give a speech. He was not built for public speaking. But when Brenna sat down beside him, he put his arm around her and whispered, "I am proud of you." She leaned into him. "I am proud of us." The celebration continued around them, but Jonas was content to sit and watch. This was more people than he would normally choose to be around, but they were good people. They were community. They were the fellowship. That night, back at their farm, Brenna made bread while Jonas worked on repairing a piece of aging equipment. They moved around each other in the kitchen with the ease of long practice, each knowing where the other would be, when to step aside, when to reach around. "We should seal a wheel tomorrow," Brenna said. "The one we started on our wedding day. It has been aging long enough." Jonas looked up from his work. "Has it been 4 years already?" 4 years next week, but close enough. They sealed the wheel the next afternoon. It was a small ceremony, just the two of them in the cave. Brenna cut away the cloth wrapping and examined the wax coating, checking for cracks or imperfections. Finding none, she pressed their marks into the still soft wax on top, the Donnelly mark and the Whitmore mark, side by side. "This one is not for sale," she said. "This one is ours. We save it for something special." "Like what?" she smiled. "I do not know yet, but we will know when the time comes." Jonas helped her carry the wheel to a special shelf she had designated for personal stores. There were a few other wheels there, each one marked with dates and notes. Their history, preserved in cheese. They stood in the cool dimness of the cave and looked at what they had made. Not just the cheese, but the space itself. The cave that had started as an impossible project and become the heart of the fellowship. The place where knowledge was shared and community was built and good work was done. "I am glad you walked 11 miles, Jonas said. Brenna laughed. "You have said that before." "I know, but I was thinking about it again, about how different things would be if you had not knocked on that door. You would have found someone eventually, some other partnership. Maybe, but it would not have been you, it would not have been this." Brenna turned to face him fully, her green skin almost luminous in the cave's low light. "Do you know what I think about? I think about what would have happened if you had said no. If you had turned me away and I had moved on to the next farm. I think about how I would have missed this entire life. How I would never have known what we could build together. But I did not say no. No, you said yes. You read Clause 7 twice, and you signed your name, and you said yes." Jonas pulled her close and kissed her, there in the cave surrounded by cheese and history and the work of their hands. It still felt like the best decision he had ever made. They walked back to the house as the sun set, the wheel sealed and stored, their partnership marked in wax and time. Tomorrow they would make more cheese. Tomorrow they would teach more apprentices. Tomorrow they would continue the work. But tonight they had this, The quiet satisfaction of work well done, the comfort of each other's presence, and the knowledge that they had built something that would outlast them both. The fellowship would continue. The cheese would age. The cave would stand. And Jonas and Brenna Donnelly Whitmore would keep making it all happen, one day at a time together. In the years that followed, the fellowship became a model for cooperative agricultural ventures across the region. Other valleys formed similar collectives, reaching out to Brenna for advice and guidance. She traveled sometimes, consulting with new groups, sharing what she had learned. Jonas stayed home and tended the farm, comfortable in his role. He expanded the goat herd further and became known for producing some of the finest dairy goats in the country. People came to buy breeding stock and stayed to learn his methods. Sarah, Brenna's first apprentice, eventually left to start her own fellowship in the northern valleys. She wrote regularly, updating them on her progress and asking for advice. Brenna responded to every letter, proud of what her student had accomplished. The farm itself changed over the years. They built a proper dairy building, expanded the house, and improved the roads leading to the cave. The cave network eventually extended nearly 50 feet into the cliff, a labyrinth of cheese and possibility. Through it all, the rhythm remained the same. Work, partnership, community, love. The pattern Brenna had established with her proposal and Jonas had accepted with his signature. They never did open the wedding wheel. Years passed and it aged, and they kept finding reasons to save it for something more special. Eventually it became a joke between them, the wheel they would never cut, aging toward perfection that could never quite be reached. But there were plenty of other wheels to cut, plenty of other cheeses to share. The fellowship threw celebrations regularly, marking milestones and achievements. Every wheel cut was a reminder of what they had built, every gathering a testament to the power of cooperation. Jonas and Brenna grew older together. Gray crept into her braid and his hands developed the arthritis common to a life of physical labor. They adjusted, as people do. They hired help for the heavy work. They trained the next generation. They kept going. One evening in their 10th year of marriage, they sat on their porch as usual, watching the sun set over the valley as usual. The goats were settled for the night. The day's cheese was pressed and salted. The fellowship was thriving. "I have been thinking," Brenna said. "About what?" "About how none of this was part of any plan. I walked up your driveway hoping for a place to work. I was not looking for love or partnership or a fellowship. I was just trying to survive. And now I have more than I ever imagined, more than I knew to hope for." Jonas reached for her hand. Same. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only came after years of sharing space and life. The stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched them marry, that had seen every day of work and every night of rest. "Do you think your grandmother would approve?" Jonas asked. "Of all of this?" Brenna smiled. "I think she would be amazed. She taught me to make cheese in a small creamery serving a small community. She never imagined something like the fellowship. But yes, I think she would approve. This is what she taught me, that good work matters, that knowledge should be shared, that we are better together than apart." "That is what you taught me too." "Did I?" "You walked up with a contract that said partnership, equal sharing, mutual respect. You could have asked for employment, for charity, for anything less, but you asked for partnership and you meant it." Brenna squeezed his hand. "You are the one who suggested amending Clause 7. Best amendment ever written. I will not argue with that." They watched the night deepen, watched the valley lights begin to glow as other fellowship members lit their lamps and settled in for the evening. Each light represented a farm, a family, a piece of the collective they had built. "We did good work," Jonas said. "We did," Brenna agreed. "And we are not done yet." "What is next?" "More of the same, I suppose. More cheese, more teaching, more building. Is that enough? Jonas considered the question. Was it enough? This quiet life, this steady work, this partnership that had become love, that had become legacy. Yes, he said finally. It is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. Brenna leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, her hand in his. Give me a roof and I will give you everything else, she murmured. That is what I told you. You did, and I kept that promise. You did, Jonas agreed. You gave me everything, not just cheese and profit and partnership. You gave me purpose and community and love. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me the same thing. You opened your door. You said yes. You gave me the roof I asked for and everything else I needed. They sat on the porch as the night settled completely. Two people who had made a deal and exceeded every term, who had started with practicality and found joy, who had built something that mattered. Tomorrow they would wake and make cheese. They would teach and learn and work. They would tend their animals and their land and their fellowship. They would continue the pattern they had established, the rhythm that had carried them this far. But tonight they had this. The quiet pleasure of sitting together, the satisfaction of looking back on years well spent, and the comfort of knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The goats stirred in the barn. A breeze carried the smell of grass and limestone and aging cheese. The valley spread below them, dark and peaceful and full of people they had helped, community they had built, legacy they had created. Jonas and Brenna Whitmore sat on their porch and watched the stars wheel overhead, content in their partnership, grateful for their luck, and ready for whatever the next day would bring together. Always together. That was the promise they had made, written and signed, amended and renewed, tested and proven. Give me a roof and I will give you everything else. She had walked 11 miles to make that offer. He had read it twice and signed his name, best deal either of them ever made.